I never thought I'd find myself staring at my husband's phone, my heart pounding as I read the messages. But what I discovered wasn't just an affair. It was with someone I trusted more than anyone. My own sister. And the worst part? It happened on our anniversary. My name is Emily, and for the longest time, I thought I had the perfect life. My husband, Daniel, was everything I ever wanted, kind, attentive, and the kind of man who would go out of his way to make me feel special. We'd been married for 10 years, and though we didn't have kids, our life together felt complete. We lived in a cozy suburban home, and every morning, Daniel would bring me coffee in bed, just the way I liked it. He'd kiss me on the forehead and say, "Good morning, beautiful," like it was the first day of our marriage all over again. My sister, Sarah, was my best friend. She was the kind of person who lit up a room the moment she walked in. We'd been inseparable since we were kids, and even as adults, we talked almost every day. She was the one I turned to when I needed advice, a shoulder to cry on, or just someone to laugh with. Sarah had always been there for me, especially during the tough times like when our mom passed away 5 years ago. I trusted her with my life. But lately something felt off. Daniel had been working late more often, and when he was home, he seemed distant. At first, I brushed it off as stress from work. He'd been under a lot of pressure at his job, and I didn't want to add to his worries. But then I started noticing little things, like how he'd quickly close his laptop when I walked into the room, or how he'd suddenly start taking his phone with him everywhere, even to the bathroom. Sarah, too, had been acting strange. She'd cancel our plans last minute, saying she was busy with work or just needed some me time. I tried not to overthink it, but the nagging feeling in the back of my mind wouldn't go away. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was letting my imagination run wild. After all, Daniel and Sarah were the two people I trusted most in the world. They would never betray me. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. And as the days went by, that feeling only grew stronger. It started with the little things. Daniel would come home late, smelling faintly of Sarah's perfume, a scent I knew all too well. At first, I told myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe they'd bumped into each other at the store, or had a quick coffee catch-up. But then I noticed how he'd avoid my eyes when I asked where he'd been. His answers were always vague, like, just out, or running errands. One night, I woke up to find Daniel's side of the bed empty. I checked the clock, 2:47 a.m. My heart raced as I tiptoed downstairs, only to find him sitting in the dark, staring at his phone. When he saw me, he quickly locked the screen and forced a smile. "Couldn't sleep," he said, but his voice was too casual, too rehearsed. The next day, I called Sarah to see if she wanted to grab lunch. She hesitated, then said she was swamped with work. But her voice sounded off, like she was hiding something. Later that evening, I saw her car parked at a cafe across town. I almost stopped to say hi, but something held me back. Instead, I watched from a distance as she sat at a corner table, laughing with someone whose back was turned to me. When the man turned slightly, my stomach dropped. It was Daniel. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My hands trembled as I drove home, my mind racing with questions. How long had this been going on? How could they do this to me? I wanted to confront them, to scream and demand answers, but I couldn't bring myself to face the truth. Not yet. The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and forced smiles. I tried to act normal around Daniel, but every time he touched me, I felt a pang of betrayal. I couldn't stop thinking about that moment at the cafe. The way Sarah had laughed, the way Daniel had leaned in close, like they were sharing a secret. It haunted me. One evening, Daniel came home with flowers. "For you," he said, handing me a bouquet of roses. I forced a smile and thanked him, but inside I was screaming. How could he act like everything was fine? How could he pretend nothing had changed? I wanted to throw the flowers in his face to demand the truth, but I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I decided to confront Sarah. I called her and asked her to meet me at our favorite park. When she arrived, she looked as beautiful as ever, her smile bright and carefree. But as we sat on the bench, I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she avoided my gaze. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice soft. I took a deep breath. "I saw you and Daniel at the cafe the other day." Her face paled, and for a moment she didn't say anything. Then she sighed and looked down at her hands. "Emily, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had hoped she would deny it, that she would tell me I was imagining things. But her apology only confirmed my worst fears. "How long?" I asked, my voice trembling. She hesitated, then said, "A few months." It started innocently, just talking, but then, I don't know how it happened. I never wanted to hurt you. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. You're my sister, I said, my voice breaking. How could you do this to me? She reached out to touch my hand, but I pulled away. I'm so sorry, Emily. I never meant to hurt you. I love you. Her words felt hollow, like a bandage on a wound that was too deep to heal. I stood up, my legs shaking. I need time to think, I said before walking away. As I drove home, I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and something else, something I couldn't quite name. It was the realization that my life, my marriage, and my relationship with my sister would never be the same. The tension in the house was unbearable. Daniel tried to act normal, but I could see the guilt in his eyes every time he looked at me. He'd ask if I was okay, if I needed anything, but his words felt empty. I couldn't bring myself to confront him. Not yet. I needed proof, something undeniable. One night, Daniel fell asleep early, exhausted from work. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his phone on the nightstand. My heart pounded as I picked it up, my fingers trembling as I entered his passcode. I scrolled through his messages, my stomach churning with every word I read. There it was, a thread of messages between him and Sarah. My heart sank as I read their conversations, filled with secret meetings, stolen moments, and declarations of love. They talked about me, about how they felt guilty, but couldn't stop themselves. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have ever imagined. I felt like the walls were closing in on me. I wanted to scream, to throw the phone against the wall, but I couldn't. Instead, I took a deep breath and walked out of the room, clutching the phone in my hand. I needed air, space to think. I ended up at Sarah's apartment. I didn't even remember driving there, but suddenly I was standing outside her door, knocking loudly. She opened the door, her eyes widening in surprise when she saw me. Emily, what are you doing here? She asked, her voice shaky. I didn't say anything. I just handed her the phone, the messages still open on the screen. She took it, her face pale as she read through the texts. When she looked up at me, her eyes were filled with tears. I'm so sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did, I said, my voice cold. You both did. How could you do this to me? You're my sister. He's my husband. How could you betray me like this? She didn't have an answer. She just stood there, crying, as I turned and walked away. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay there. I couldn't look at her, couldn't bear to see the pain in her eyes, pain that I knew I had caused, but that she had brought on herself. When I got home, Daniel was awake, sitting on the couch with his head in his hands. He looked up when I walked in, his eyes red and swollen. Emily, he said, his voice hoarse. I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, staring at him, feeling a mix of anger, sadness, and betrayal. Finally, I spoke. How long? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated, then said, a few months. It started innocently, just talking, but then, I don't know how it happened. I never wanted to hurt you. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. You're my husband, I said, my voice breaking. How could you do this to me? He reached out to touch my hand, but I pulled away. I'm so sorry, Emily. I love you. His words felt hollow, like a bandage on a wound that was too deep to heal. I stood there, staring at him, feeling like my world had been shattered into a million pieces. The days that followed were a blur of tears, anger, and sleepless nights. Daniel moved out of the house, staying at a friend's place while we figured out what to do next. Sarah and I didn't speak for weeks. Every time I thought about her, I felt a mix of betrayal and heartbreak. How could she do this to me? How could she betray me like this? I tried to focus on work, but it was impossible. My mind kept drifting back to the messages I'd read, the lies they'd told, the betrayal that had shattered my world. I felt like I was walking through a fog, unable to see a way forward. One night, I found myself standing outside Sarah's apartment again. I didn't know why I was there, but I needed closure. I knocked on the door, and after a moment she opened it. She looked tired, her eyes red and swollen from crying. Emily, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm so sorry. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, staring at her, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. Finally, I spoke. Why? I asked, my voice trembling. Why did you do it? She hesitated, then said, I don't know. It just happened. I never meant to hurt you. Her words felt hollow, but I could see the pain in her eyes. She was hurting too, and for a moment, I felt a pang of sympathy. But it wasn't enough to erase the betrayal. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, I said, my voice breaking. You're my sister. You were supposed to be there for me, not stab me in the back. She didn't say anything. She just stood there, crying as I turned and walked away. I didn't know if I'd ever be able to forgive her, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I needed time to heal, to figure out how to move forward. As for Daniel, we decided to separate. The trust between us was broken, and I didn't know if it could ever be repaired. He moved out of the house, and I was left alone, trying to pick up the pieces of my shattered life. It wasn't easy. There were days when I felt like I couldn't go on, when the pain was too much to bear. But slowly I started to heal. I focused on myself, on rebuilding my life, and on finding a way to move forward. Time has a way of healing wounds, even the deepest ones. It's been a year since everything fell apart, and while the pain hasn't completely gone away, it's become easier to carry. Daniel and I finalized our divorce, and though it was painful, it was also a relief. I needed to let go of the past to make room for a new future. Sarah and I still don't talk much, but we've started to rebuild our relationship, one small step at a time. It's not the same as it was before, and maybe it never will be, but I've learned that forgiveness is more for me than for her. Holding on to anger only hurts me in the end. I've also learned a lot about myself through all of this. I've realized that I'm stronger than I thought, that I can survive even when it feels like my world is falling apart. I've learned the importance of setting boundaries and standing up for myself, even when it's hard. Most importantly, I've learned that betrayal doesn't define me. It's something that happened to me, but it's not who I am. I've come to understand that I deserve love and respect, and I won't settle for anything less. Life is messy, and people make mistakes. But it's how we handle those mistakes that defines us. I've chosen to move forward, to focus on the future rather than dwelling on the past. It hasn't been easy, but it's been worth it. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that no matter how dark things seem, there's always a way forward. It might not be the path you expected, but it's a path nonetheless. And sometimes that's enough. If you were in Emily's shoes, what would you have done? Could you forgive a betrayal like this? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more gripping stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat.